It all started when I was a kid, trying to figure out my place in the world while being the youngest in a complicated family dynamic. Growing up, I often felt like I was on the outside looking in. My older sister, who's about 7 years older than me, always seemed to get preferential treatment from our parents. I don't think they meant to, but it was like the world revolved around her, and I was just there to be part of the background noise. I understand now that part of it had to do with her being the firstborn, the one who got all the attention at first. But I always felt overlooked, and it wasn't just a feeling, it was a reality. My sister, who was a bit of a whirlwind growing up, had a way of pulling all the attention to herself. It's not that she was a bad person, she had her good qualities, but she also had a tendency to manipulate situations in her favor. She quickly realized that if she made enough noise, people would give her what she wanted. As the years went by, that pattern never really changed. She'd complain about things, and everyone would rush to fix it for her. When she needed a break from her kids, she'd guilt-trip our parents into taking care of them. I, on the other hand, was expected to fall in line and follow whatever was going on around me, no questions asked. My parents never saw it that way. They saw it as simply helping out or supporting family. They didn't realize they were enabling her, letting her off the hook for her own responsibilities. Now, I'm not saying I wasn't a good kid. I had my responsibilities, my chores, my schoolwork. But there was always this unspoken expectation that I should put everything else aside and just help. Whether it was babysitting my nephews for hours on end or dropping everything to run errands for my sister, it was like my life didn't matter. As time passed, I grew increasingly frustrated. My sister seemed to have no boundaries. She would ask me to do things that were way outside what a sibling should reasonably expect of another, like watching her kids for hours when I had my own plans, or being expected to drop everything and cater to her demands. And let's not even get into how my parents would just go along with it, enabling her every move. I tried to talk to them, but it felt like I was speaking to a brick wall. They didn't understand why I was upset. I wasn't asking for anything unreasonable, just the space to live my own life, to not be constantly put in a position where I was expected to sacrifice my time and energy for someone who seemed to have no appreciation for it. But every time I brought it up, it felt like I was the one in the wrong. My mom would say, "Your family, you should help out," and my dad would say, "Your sister needs support." It was exhausting. I was stuck in a role I didn't ask for, and it felt like there was no escape. Everything changed when I started to get older and realized just how unhealthy the family dynamic had become. I was in my late 20s when it hit me. I had spent years watching my sister act like she was the only one who mattered. She'd give me a call when things got tough, expecting me to immediately drop whatever I was doing to come to her rescue. But when it was my turn to ask for help, she'd either ignore me or find some excuse. It was a constant one-way street, and I was the one doing all the giving. I knew I couldn't keep doing this. It was eating away at me, making me resent my family, and more importantly, making me resent myself for letting it go on for so long. The moment I realized this had to end came when my sister called me yet again, asking me to come over and watch her kids. I was tired. I had plans. But she guilt-tripped me, using the classic "I really need help" line. This time, I snapped. I told her I wasn't going to do it anymore. I told her that I couldn't keep being her babysitter, her personal assistant, and her fallback whenever she needed someone. I was done. But when I said it, I wasn't expecting the reaction I got. It wasn't like she took it well. She didn't just accept that I had set a boundary. She exploded. She yelled at me over the phone, calling me selfish and irresponsible. She told me that I was ruining everything, that I didn't understand what it was like to have kids and a husband to take care of. The words stung, but I wasn't backing down. I had spent years feeling like my needs didn't matter, like I was invisible in my own family. But I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. The argument didn't end on the phone. No, it continued into an all-out family confrontation when I saw her in person a few days later. At that point, I had already been planning a way to distance myself from the situation. I was tired of being stuck in this cycle, and I wanted to take control of my life for once. But it wasn't going to be easy. My mother was upset, and so was my father, but they weren't angry with my sister. They were angry with me for standing up for myself. My mom said I should be the bigger person and help out because family is everything, but my father was more indifferent, and I could tell he was just tired of dealing with the drama. I tried to explain to them that I wasn't being unreasonable. I wasn't asking for much, just respect and the space to live my own life. But they didn't understand. They were so used to doing everything for my sister that they couldn't see how wrong it was. I was trying to get them to see the bigger picture, that this wasn't just about babysitting or running errands, it was about boundaries, and how I had been pushed to the breaking point. At some point, it became clear that nothing was going to change. They weren't going to stop enabling my sister, and I wasn't going to keep living my life on her terms. That was when I decided to go public with it. I took to Reddit, anonymously sharing my frustration. I knew it was a risk, but I had to let it out. I had to share my side of the story. I never expected it to blow up the way it did. I posted everything. How my sister had been using me for years, how my parents had enabled her, and how I had reached my breaking point. The post went viral. People from all over the world offered support, advice, and even empathy for what I was going through. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one in this kind of situation. I wasn't the only one who had a family that didn't seem to care about their own needs. But my family didn't react well. They found out about the post, and when they did, all hell broke loose. My sister called me, furious, accusing me of airing our dirty laundry and making her look bad. She told me that I had made her out to be a bad mother, which was never my intention. I tried to explain that I wasn't lying, that everything I had posted was the truth, but she wasn't having it. She just cried and yelled and blamed me for ruining everything. That's when my mother got involved, showing up at my door demanding that I take the post down. She claimed I was causing unnecessary drama and putting the family through too much stress. I told her no, I wasn't going to take it down. I had every right to express my feelings, and I had every right to set boundaries. My mom cried, but it didn't move me. After that, everything got worse before it got better. My sister continued to attack me, calling me selfish and blaming me for everything that had gone wrong in her life. But I stuck to my guns. I wasn't going to back down, and I wasn't going to let my family dictate how I lived my life anymore. The drama only intensified over the next few weeks. My parents tried to mediate, but it felt like every time we took a step forward, we were dragged 2 steps back. My mother was still stuck in this idea that I should just forgive my sister and move on, but I couldn't. I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. The immediate aftermath of the Reddit post left me emotionally drained, but there was something undeniably liberating about having spoken my truth. It felt as though a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The outpouring of support from strangers who had been through similar struggles was unexpected, but it gave me a sense of validation that I hadn't realized I was seeking for so long. For the first time, I wasn't questioning whether my feelings were justified. I knew they were. People who had no stake in my family dynamic saw the injustice, and they weren't afraid to call it out. But while the outside world had become a source of comfort, my family's reaction was nothing short of explosive. The consequences of my actions were beginning to settle in. What I had hoped would be a simple expression of my feelings had now created a chasm in my family, a rift that seemed to grow wider with every passing day. I wasn't just fighting my sister anymore. I was fighting an entire family dynamic that had been years in the making. The next few weeks were a blur of arguments, emotional manipulation, and quiet moments of reflection. Every conversation with my parents felt like a tense negotiation. It was as though I had breached some unspoken family code by airing our dirty laundry in public. My mother especially couldn't understand why I couldn't just let things go. She kept asking why I needed to make everything so public when, in her mind, family issues should be dealt with privately. But I couldn't backtrack. I had made the decision to stand up for myself, and there was no turning back. At first, my dad tried to stay neutral. He was always the quiet one, the type who preferred to avoid conflict whenever possible. But it wasn't long before he, too, began to show his true colors. He started defending my sister, making excuses for her behavior. It was clear to me that, in his mind, my sister's actions were somehow more justified simply because she had children and a family to look after. To him, that meant her struggles were more legitimate, and the demands she made on me were justifiable. I could see it in his eyes, his unwavering belief that the family had to stick together, no matter what. As for my sister, the situation only escalated. She refused to speak to me for weeks after the post went live. Her silence was deafening, a painful reminder that things had irrevocably changed. I had hoped that, eventually, the dust would settle, and we could at least begin to rebuild our relationship, but that hope was soon dashed. Instead of coming to me to talk things through, she doubled down on her accusations. The one thing she couldn't bear was the idea that someone in the family might think differently. She believed that by airing our issues to the public, I was undermining the very foundation of our family, creating a wedge that would never go away. What made matters worse was the gossip. Our family has always had a tendency to talk behind closed doors. Conversations between relatives, some of whom I hadn't seen in years, started to revolve around me. They didn't understand my decision. They couldn't fathom why I had made such a bold move. Every time a distant cousin or an old family friend reached out to express their thoughts, I was either met with sympathy or disappointment. Some said they understood why I felt the way I did, but others claimed that I should have handled the situation differently, more privately, more discreetly. It seemed as though no one really wanted to take the time to understand why I did what I did. They just wanted the piece of the old family dynamic back, even if it meant sacrificing my well-being in the process. Through all of this, I became more and more isolated. My parents, despite their attempts to play the role of peacemakers, made it clear where their loyalty lay. They didn't understand why I couldn't just forgive my sister and move forward, as though time and emotional neglect could be easily swept under the rug. Every day, I fought with the guilt of knowing that my family thought I was the one who had caused the rift. It didn't matter that my sister had pushed me to this breaking point, or that I'd spent years quietly suffering while everyone else around me acted like nothing was wrong. What mattered to them was that I had chosen to break the unspoken rule of family solidarity. But as the weeks turned into months, something in me began to change. I was no longer the person who would silently endure the weight of familial expectations. I had spoken up, and though it had come at a great personal cost, there was an undeniable sense of relief that came with no longer being the quiet observer. I started to understand something important, something I hadn't fully grasped before. The resentment I had been harboring wasn't just about the specifics of what my sister had done. It was about the fact that I had been living in a world where my needs, my voice, and my desires were always secondary to everyone else's. The problem wasn't just that my sister expected too much of me, it was that I had allowed myself to be treated that way for so long. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my decision to confront the situation wasn't just for me, it was for my future self. I could no longer live my life in the shadows of my sister's demands or my parents' expectations. The act of standing up for myself, no matter how messy the fallout, was my declaration of independence. It was my way of saying that my time, my energy, and my emotional well-being mattered just as much as anyone else's. It wasn't about being selfish, it was about being self-respecting. And so, I began to focus on myself. I started spending more time with friends who had always supported me, people who had never tried to manipulate or guilt-trip me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells every time I entered my own home. I started going to therapy, something I had put off for far too long, in part because I was so focused on fixing everything for everyone else. It felt like a revelation. The therapist helped me untangle the years of resentment and guilt that had built up over time. With each session, I became more aware of the unhealthy patterns I had been trapped in and how I had allowed them to shape my sense of self-worth. But as I began to heal and gain a clearer sense of who I was, the rift with my family continued to widen. My sister and I no longer spoke. When I did see my parents, the conversations were awkward, strained, and often left me feeling emotionally drained. The guilt trips and manipulations hadn't stopped. If anything, they had intensified. My mother would call, pleading for reconciliation, but her pleas felt empty. It wasn't reconciliation she wanted. It was the restoration of the family as it had been before, with everyone playing their assigned roles. She couldn't see that the family I had known no longer existed. As difficult as it was to acknowledge, I began to accept that my relationship with my family had fundamentally changed. Some days, the isolation felt unbearable. I missed the old days, when we would all gather for holidays and celebrations without any of this underlying tension. I longed for the days when I could be a part of the family without feeling like I was losing myself in the process. But over time, I realized that sometimes change is inevitable. Sometimes families grow apart, not because of malice, but because of different paths, different priorities, and different understandings of what it means to love and support one another. I had always thought that family was something that, no matter how broken or messy, would always stay the same. But I now saw that families, like people, evolve. Some relationships can withstand the strain of hard times, while others simply cannot. And perhaps, after years of neglecting my own needs, it was time to accept that the version of family I had hoped for was no longer possible. In the end, I didn't have the power to change the past. I couldn't undo the years of resentment, the silent sacrifices, or the unspoken expectations. What I could do, however, was take control of my future. My relationships with my sister and parents would never be the same, and that truth stung. But by standing up for myself, by acknowledging my own worth, I had taken the first step in healing. Even if my family couldn't understand it, I knew that I was on the path toward reclaiming my life. As the months went on, I began to rebuild. Slowly. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was living my life for myself, no longer trapped by the expectations and manipulations of others. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. And sometimes, that's all you need. The courage to take the first step toward your own freedom, even if it means letting go of the past. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit notification bell to stay updated.